And now our next session is so top secret, we're not even allowed to mention it. So we're not even allowed to mention one of the speakers in the program, but now all will be revealed. Over to my colleague Julian to introduce them both. From India, Roger Darashah and Arnab Mukherjee, and from Portugal, Roger Darashah.
Thank you very much, Steph. Yes, well, this is just me for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to my two friends. First of all, I do want to welcome Roger Darashah. Roger is a partner in a company called Delta Analytics, which is the company behind the NEMO MRA report system, which we're going to hear about in a minute. He's a truly global PR practitioner who's previously lived and worked in London, Paris, Barcelona, Sao Paulo, and most recently in Mumbai, where he was the chief operating officer of India's largest PR firm. Now he's based in Lisbon, where he's running LATAM Intersect PR, specializing in the Latin American region. And I'm also going to introduce you, subject to Stephanie's mysterious permission, to Arnab Mukherjee, who is the co-inventor of the audiencing technology on which the NEMO offering is based. And Arnab is a self-professed, self-taught technologist and entrepreneur, who's been exposed to and reported on so many ideas as a journalist for leading print and broadcast titles since 1995 in India and the UAE. He was also a PR strategist and entrepreneur. He started and ran a PR firm before merging it with India's largest PR firm. Alongside his day job, Arnab immersed himself through 3 decades in understanding and experimenting with learning and analytics in real-world settings, classroom settings, and mediated by technology. He dropped out of software engineering, but acquired the eclectic education that he needed from an extensive array of sources, both unconventional and traditional routes like Harvard Business School executive education. Now, in true empathetic style, today's proposition is all about you. Sorry? Yeah, what's on your mind? What are you concerned about? And what are your priorities? Business development, creativity, data, understanding audiences, and specifically the so-called voice of society. Yes, that zeitgeist, that flavor of the month, week, or year that brands expect us to understand, leverage, and even anticipate. And it's never been more critical to decrypt this. Global analysts Gartner cite understanding and measuring the voice of society as a top 10 priority for this year and beyond. Here's what they said in January. The voice of society is the shared perspective of people in a community. Organizations must consider how society affects the performance of the business, and they have a responsibility to reduce or eliminate tone-deaf or insensitive racial and ethical concerns, because failure to do so can be damaging to a business. Well, agreed, but this voice of society is devilishly difficult to measure, because how do you quantify agreement or disagreement or even indifference? And it's even harder to predict. The consequences of misreading the voice of society, however, have never been higher. Let's look at 2 or 3 examples. I mean, in February this year, Google had to pay $3.8 million, including nearly $2.6 million in back pay, to settle allegations of systemic pay and hiring discrimination that disadvantaged women and Asian workers. How did this happen to a company so vocal on not being evil? 2 years ago, 100 Microsoft employees published an open letter decrying the company's use of the VR technology HoloLens for the US military, helping one country's governments, in their words, increase lethality using tools they built. We didn't sign up to develop weapons, and we demand a say in how our work is used, the letter asserted. 100 dissenters amongst over 135,000 employees. Is that significant or representative? Is this a voice that the company should be responding to? Who knows? A year earlier, Delta Airlines and United Airlines withdrew from an agreement to provide a discounted travel for National Rifle Association members attending the group's annual assembly. The move followed a growing boycott led led by a dozen major companies to withdraw from similar agreements. Again, are such protests really representative or simply the most vocal? What would the right course of action have been? Well, wouldn't it be great to have got a handle on this voice? But where do marketers and communicators begin? How do you define or measure the real voice of society? Wouldn't it be great to have a dash of data to help understand how society really relates to a particular issue and whether this corresponds to how a brand or its competitors are perceived? Well, to empower your intuition, to help validate your instincts to develop ideas that your data-driven clients and data scientists simply couldn't refuse. But is the answer to be found in data or in instinct? Well, to cite Garry Kasparov's defeat by IBM's Big Blue in 1997, only when Kasparov partnered with a computer could the machine be defeated. In fact, it was this human plus machine partnership that proved invincible. So now I'm going to pass over to Arnab to tell you how NEMO enables such a human plus machine partnership for everybody, including marketers. Arnab.
Thanks, Julian. I want to make 2 points clear before getting on with our story. First of all, as all of us would agree, most of us already use data by applying methods such as market research or big data analytics or artificial intelligence. These methods have significant drawbacks which are baked into the design of such methods and cannot be overcome. Some acknowledged drawbacks are what is listed on the screen on the 2 columns. The next point I wish to make is that Delta Analytics, what we offer, is not sentiment analytics or tracking, although people familiar with such solutions do initially bucket us together because motivation relativity analytics does not have an equivalent yet. Roger has assigned me the job of telling you about the science behind motivation relativity analytics, and instead of going into technicality, I will use 2 anecdotes or reactions we experiment in one question to illustrate what our system does and the impact or the consequence of what it does and how does the system do what it does. A few months ago, when the system was still in its rudimentary stage, we demonstrated it to an organization headed by an ex-chief investigator at the Scotland Yard. When this gentleman understood what our system offers, his reaction was, this is exactly how seasoned investigators investigate. How did you manage to platform this? So that's what our system does. Investigate any issue like a seasoned investigator. In a few minutes, we will partially reveal the secret sauce to you, which powers the system to behave in a very human, investigative fashion. The second reaction came from someone who's the global head of communications for a giant packaging company. When he saw what our system could achieve, thus taking the PhD out of setting up or interpreting data analytics, he said, and I quote, "What you have innovated is like playing Beethoven on a harmonica." This versatile utility of such a Beethoven on a harmonica investigative system for us, marketeers, communicators, creative professionals, and strategists, I'm sure is immense, you will agree. And Roger will speak about it very soon. Coming now to the scientific breakthrough that allowed our system to achieve this capability, the revelation of the secret sauce, so to speak. For that, I will ask you a question, and everyone can respond with just a yes or a no. If your answer is yes, just hold your hand up next to your face. If your answer is no, let your hand, and I saw Nuno's hand going down, that's wonderful. So hold your hand up to your face if your answer is yes, if your answer is no. your hand stays where it is. Nuno's hand is back up. But the question is, have you ever heard anyone mention 5 kilograms of anger or 4 liters of hunger? Have you ever come across anyone saying 5 kilograms of, or whatever kilograms or units of anger or units of hunger or any such needs or emotion? Well, I don't see a single hand up, which is actually what. Did anyone notice any hand up? I haven't. So I'm saying that there's no. So Stephanie nods quite vigorously, no hands up. We are not there yet. We are not yet at the stage where we can measure motivations such as anger or hunger. Anger is a motivation, hunger is a need. We can't yet measure them in absolute terms. But what we have achieved, what our system has achieved, is the ability to start measuring them in relative terms. You may find the question ridiculous, but note that just about 200 years ago, we humans did not know how to measure temperature and could only refer to certain temperatures as hot or cold or very hot or very cold. Yet today, measurement of temperature is critical for a wide area of human activity, whether it's baking bread or landing a spacecraft on the moon or Mars. And this is among humans. The motivations precede not just actions or behavior, but precede the process of registering stimuli or information, the thinking process itself. It would be extremely useful, I believe, I'm sure you would agree, if we could segregate and measure motivation. And that too without invading privacy or without incurring prohibitive costs or harming the environment. As I have said, what we have, the big breakthrough which we have achieved allows us to measure relative motivation. Now, this is zero-mile action before market research or big data analytics can be applied. But it can also be applied alongside such methods for better understanding, or in certain situations, in the absence of the availability of such methods, for whatever reasons, this can be used on its own. Our application is like the scout. Scouts land in a territory first to identify and assess features of interest. The scouts precede the army, which market research and big data analytics are. The army then moves in to execute the necessary action at the required scale. So there is one more zero-mile aspect, which is about the scale of search that our system conducts, but we will take that separately. And to invent what we have, we studied deeply and participated in what was going on in the field of artificial intelligence, in machine learning, in learning, both individual and organizational learning, in performance management and marketing and communication, and then formulated our hypothesis, which we experimented on in the first in real world settings, then by codifying our understanding and finally converting it into software algorithms. This process has taken us more than 2 decades. And what we are offering to you as a plug and play proposition is the outcome of this combined effort of almost 40 years by the team behind this project, And this is the effort which allowed us to formulate the concept of what we term as anthropo-intelligence, driven by cognomaterial objects, and incorporate all this into our system, which, in our opinion, delivers what we term as the 10x Pareto results, meaning addressing the 2% factors which impact 98% of the outcome. Since Pareto, as you all know, is the 80-20 principle, which is about 20% factors being responsible for 80% of the results. Basically, this means that our system is super effective, about 10 times more effective than what is traditionally considered to be acceptable. That is the Beethoven on harmonica for you to experience and benefit from. I will now hand over to Roger to demonstrate how you can apply the system to your priority. Roger?
Thank you, Arnab. Thanks, Stephanie. If you go, thank you. So what we've resolved is the rock and the hard place conundrum, the challenge of traditional market research and big data. We have a system that is non-conditioned and non-conditioning. You don't influence the result by conducting the research. It doesn't require a PhD to interpret. It's intuitive and can be interpreted by anyone with intuition and a marketing background. More importantly, the insights can be generated quickly and cost effectively, but they don't just cover known knowns. One of the biggest shortcomings of traditional market research and traditional analytics is that they're based on presumptions and assumptions, and these aren't. While we do pick up known knowns, there's also the potential of uncovering unknown knowns, which will open up a whole new realm of opportunities for marketers. If you go to the next slide. So, as Arnab described, motivational relativity analytics enables us to detect and measure the needs and emotions society attaches to a particular issue, and then compare those needs and emotions to those that are associated with the brand. So the system that we built using needs and emotion is much more stable than sentiment or feelings, which tend to be impulse driven and short term and reaction. These are much more stable and can be recorded over time, so we can compare them not just between brands over an issue, we can also compare them over time. If you go to the next slide, I'll be showing you some examples. I want just to talk you through the format. There are two elements. On the left of the screen, you can see the clouds. There will be clouds on the screen, which I'll show you. The position of those clouds on the axis determines the degree to which a brand is aligned to the voice of society around an issue. So the closer the two clouds are together, the more aligned, the further apart, the bigger the delta, the more distinct. We're not necessarily talking about agreement. If a brand shares an intersection with the voice of society on an issue, it doesn't necessarily mean agreement. It simply means that people associate similar motivations around the issue directly without the brand, and also when a brand is introduced. Convergence, or that intersection, indicates a similar level of needs and emotions. And that common ground is something that can be exploited for brands. Conversely, divergence or deltas indicate the opposite. Using a simple logic of empathy, seeing the world from multiple perspectives, irrespective of whether we agree with them, suggests that brands that share an intersection with the voice of society over an issue will be better placed to engage that audience than those who don't. The relative size of the clouds, which I'll show you, indicates the volume of the conversation. The intensity is indicated in the color. So intensity, again, is not about agreement. It's simply about the strength of feeling associated with a particular issue. The deeper the shade, the more intense and polarized the association. So we're not deciphering what those points of view are. We're simply providing you an analysis of the relative sentiments, the relative intensity. The axes are also relative. The x-axis is based on Stanford University's classification of 10 emotions. The left tends to be towards emotions of trust and hope and reliance. The right tends to be towards fear and anger and similar emotions. The y-axis correlates to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs that you're all familiar with. So our algorithm picks up all semantic references and synonyms and equivalents of these needs and emotions and plots them accordingly. On the right-hand side, you'll see a quadrant. The quadrant indicates the relative source of all these motivations. So where the public is drawing them from, enabling us to compare them between the voice of society without the brand, and then comparing that with when the brand is introduced. If you look at those quadrants, I'll explain on the next example, but A, the source in that instance would come from the brand or the industry. B, the source would come from industry experts, or what we call qualified experts. It could be analysts or trade media. C is the general public talking about the brand, and D is the general public talking about the issue in general. So understanding the source of those motivations enables the brand then to map and adjust their communications accordingly. If you go to the next slide, we'll see the first example. So we took an example, we took the idea of cultural diplomacy and we looked at 4 international festivals, art and music festivals. You can see them listed: Abu Dhabi, Edinburgh, Manchester, and Manchester. And we put them through the machine. One of the themes that came out of the platform was this idea of giving voice, representation. That wasn't our idea. Our idea was cultural diplomacy. What that came back as was giving voice and representation. And what you can see on the left, first of all, looking at the clouds, is that there's a significant delta between the needs and emotions involving or referencing the voice of society and those involving the brands. What that looks like from our perspective is it looks like an echo. We call it an echo chamber effect, the idea that the brands are talking about themselves and their industry, but those conversations and the motivations associated with the same appear to be distinct from what the wider public is talking about. You can note that from the color of the clouds, that the discussions appear to be more intense. So it appears obviously that they care more about the subject than the voice of society. In relative terms, you can see that Abu Dhabi is significantly more detached than the others. This could be explained by a strong driver emerging from the unqualified public. If you look at the right-hand side of that diagram, you can see that for Abu Dhabi, the unqualified public, so it's people with just broadly unqualified members of the public, are driving 36, more than a third of those motivations. And they're not necessarily, that's quadrant C, and they're not necessarily talking about cultural diplomacy. So there could be an issue that what is driving needs and emotions on this subject for Abu Dhabi is not necessarily what they want, which is cultural diplomacy. The other examples, the industry and the brand is driving the conversation. You can see quadrant A for the other 2 festivals. Note the relative unimportance of crowdsourcing. So crowdsourcing would be unqualified in unqualified conversations on the issue. That's a quadrant C, and you can see how low that is, which is an interesting discovery. So, random crowdsourcing doesn't appear to be driving much motivation here. The societal voice is much more driven through, in this instance, qualified experts, which is column A and in quadrant B on this diagram. If you go to the next slide, we'll see another example. So this was another insight that was pulled up from the same study. What was shown was, what was revealed was this idea of investment in cultural diplomacy. Again, this is not our idea. We didn't program this. This was what came out from the searches, 120,000 structured searches. You'll see the scans reveal a pronounced delta between most of the brands and the voice of society. The exception, the remarkable exception, being Manchester International Festival, which seems to be very present, very aligned with the voice of society. Again, that doesn't mean that they agree with each other, but it do means that they share a level of what I would call brand empathy. Look at the quadrants again. Manchester's association is largely driven through qualified experts, again, nearly 80%. And maybe this is their secret. They virtually jettisoned association with unqualifieds, so random public, in favor of very specific industry experts. So that would be analysts, industry commentators, trade media, a strategy which might appear counterintuitive for a consumer brand in the age of crowdsourcing and user-generated content, but it's one that's reaping rewards in terms of empathy for Manchester. You'll note that Manchester as well is lighter. You can't see it, well, you can see it here. Is much lighter, meaning that the motivations are much less intense than those of Abu Dhabi and Edinburgh. If you go to the next one, the final one, this one yeah, thank you, Stephanie. We ran again on the same study we ran in the US. So we looked at the comparison along the theme that we pulled out, which was investment in cultural diplomacy, and we ran this in the US. You can see again, Manchester is very, very aligned to the voice of society. It's present within the voice of society, a high level, a high degree of empathy. However, in the common with the UK, the societal voice is distinctly separate from the rest of them. You'll note that on the quadrants, you can see that there's a fairly high degree of distribution between where the sources are coming from, meaning that it's a fairly balanced discussion that any of those brands could participate in. And if any of them other than Manchester wanted to do so, there would be an opportunity for them. If you go to the next slide, thank you, Stephanie. Then we have an example here. I'm not going to dwell on this, but I'm not going to interpret this. You can see, so only I want to highlight here that Nestle, we did a study on good food, what people associate with good food, and one of the themes that came out was food waste. You can see that Nestle is intersecting with the voice of society. That's interesting. Nestle is driven largely from its own brand. You can see it's in quadrant A, but there would be an opportunity for Nestle to engage on a subject that's relevant to society voice very easily. If you go to the next slide, Stephanie. So what we have is a tool that enables us to analyze en masse huge aggregate pieces of data that enables us to understand not what we think society is thinking, but what society is thinking and how that relates to brands. We have two products. One is instant pitching. This is, I'm an agency person. This is a great tool for agency pitches. If you are wanting to understand how a brand fits, how it relates to society, how that compares to the competition, you can do that. The next one, Stephanie, that's slide 17, is the rolling tracker. Again, it's the same idea, but this is one would be the same configuration, but it would be repeated. So you can see how the voice of society and the motivations of various brands were tracking over time. That could be used to measure and adjust and analyze a campaign over time, or correct a campaign. If you skip the next two slides, Stephanie, 18 and 19, and go direct to 20, so we have a quick poll. We can conduct some of these for you. If we ask you the first question, I think there's a poll coming, Stephanie. Which issue would people like us to investigate? And then we'll ask you which sectors. So if you respond to that first question, which issue would you like us to analyze? We picked three here. We can do any issue, but we've picked three if people could vote on that. What's important to them or they think is important to some of their clients. And again, if you click on the next question, which sector would you like us to analyze? We can do that. We'll run the reports. We'll send you the reports this week. If any of you need any more information or to contact us, the contact details are on the next slide, or you can connect with Julian, or I think Stephanie will issue them on the chat. Stephanie, if we've got the voting responses, so brilliant. I'm glad we got innovation. That's a good one because everyone's trying to grab it, but it's not easy. So we'll do innovation, and if we can get the results for which sector, Arnab and I will get to work and start loading the machines. Arnab, I'll let you have the last word. We have, I think, 1 minute.
Well, thanks, Roger and Julian. And we actually have Julian who has an announcement to make. So, Julian, your show now.
I'm not going to take more than 30 seconds because we are about to finish, but I just did want to add that we are very interested in this. We think that it's something that could help anybody involved in maintaining the reputation of a company or a brand. As Arnab said, it is literally the result of 20 years of work. And we are going to partner with the NEMO team and Delta Analytics, which is the company behind it, to help make this accessible to independent agencies and their clients. So we'll be in touch with you. Don't worry about that. But we wanted to thank Arnab and Roger for sharing this with us. It's at quite an initial stage, but it's ready to go and it's very exciting. Thank you very much, Roger, and thank you, Arnab. That's really great.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you so much, Roger and Arnab. That was extraordinary.